The prehistory of Papua New Guinea can be traced to about 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, when people first migrated towards the Australian continent. The written history began when European navigators first sighted New Guinea in the early part of the 17th century. Archaeology. Archaeological evidence indicates that humans arrived on New Guinea perhaps 60,000 years ago, although this is under debate. They came probably by sea from Southeast Asia during an Ice Age period when the sea was lower and distances between islands shorter. Although the first arrivals were hunters and gatherers, early evidence shows that people managed the forest environment to provide food. There also are indications of Neolithic gardening having been practiced at Cook at the same time that agriculture was developing in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Today's staples, sweet potatoes and pigs, were later arrivals, but shellfish and fish have long been mainstays of coastal dwellers' diets. Recent archaeological research suggests that 50,000 years ago people may have occupied sites in the highlands at altitudes of up to 2,000 meters, rather than being restricted to warmer coastal areas. European contact. When Europeans first arrived, inhabitants of New Guinea and nearby islands, whose technologies included bone, wood, and stone tools, had a productive agricultural system. They traded along the coast and in the interior. The first known Europeans to sight New Guinea were probably the Portuguese and Spanish navigators sailing in the South Pacific in the early part of the 16th century. In 1526 to 1527, the Portuguese explorer Jorge de Menezes accidentally came upon the principal island and is credited with naming it Papua, after a Malay word for the frizzled quality of Melanesian people's hair. The Spaniard Inigo Ortiz de Retez applied the term New Guinea to the island in 1545 because of a perceived resemblance between the island's inhabitants and those found on the African Guinea coast. Although European navigators visited the islands and explored their coastlines thereafter, European researchers knew little of the inhabitants until the 1870s, when Russian anthropologist Nikolai Mikhailovich made a number of expeditions to New Guinea, spending several years living among native tribes, and described their way of life in a comprehensive treatise. Territory of Papua. In 1883, the colony of Queensland tried to annex the southern half of eastern New Guinea, but the British government did not approve. However, when Germany began settlements in the north of British Protectorate was proclaimed in 1884 over the southern coast of New Guinea and its adjacent islands. The Protectorate, called British New Guinea, was annexed outright on September 4, 1888. The possession was placed under the authority of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1902. Following the passage of the Papua Act in 1905, British New Guinea became the territory of Papua, and formal Australian administration began in 1906, although Papua remained under their control as a British possession until the independence of Papua New Guinea in 1975. There was little economic activity in Papua. Australia administered it separately under the Papua Act until it was invaded by the Empire of Japan in 1941, and civil administration suspended. During the Pacific War, Papua was governed by an Australian military administration from Port Moresby, where General Douglas MacArthur occasionally made his headquarters. German New Guinea. With Europe's growing desire for coconut oil, Godefroy's of Hamburg, the largest trading firm in the Pacific, began trading for copper and in the New Guinea Islands. In 1884, the German Empire formally took possession of the northeast quarter of the island and put its administration in the hands of a chartered trading company formed for the purpose, the German New Guinea Company. In the charter granted to this company by the German imperial government in May 1885, it was given the power to exercise sovereign rights over the territory and other unoccupied lands in the name of the government, and the ability to negotiate directly with the native inhabitants. Relationships with foreign powers were retained as the preserve of the German government. The New Guinea Company paid for the local governmental institutions directly, in return for the concessions which had been awarded to it. In 1899, the German imperial government assumed direct control of the territory, thereafter known as German New Guinea. New Guinea was basically a business venture. Thousands of local workers were hired as cheap labor on cocoa and copper plantations. In 1899, the German government took control of the colony from the New Guinea Company of Berlin. Education was in the hands of missionaries. In 1914, when the First World War broke out, Australia seized the German colony. The plantations were given to Australian war veterans, and in 1921 the League of Nations gave Australia a trusteeship over New Guinea. The plantations and gold mining generated a degree of prosperity. Territory of New Guinea. The Commonwealth of Australia assumed a mandate from the League of Nations for governing the former German territory of New Guinea in 1920. It was administered under this mandate until the Japanese invasion in December 1941 brought about the suspension of Australian civil administration. Much of the territory of New Guinea, including the islands of Bougainville and New Britain, was occupied by Japanese forces before being recaptured by Australian and American forces during the final months of the war. Exploration of mandated territory of New Guinea. Akmana Expedition 1929–1930. The exploration of Papua New Guinea has been a continuing process. As of October 2017, new groups of people occasionally are still contacted. Not until recent years has New Guinea's exploration been planned. Much of it has been the work of miners, labor recruiters, missionaries, adventurers, with different objectives in mind. Many of these people have been doers, not recorders of facts, with the result that our knowledge of the territory's exploration has not kept pace with the exploration itself. An exception is the record of the Akmana Gold Prospecting Company's field party, which carried out 2 expeditions from September to December 1929 and from mid-February to the end of June 1930. They journeyed on the Banyanda, a cruiser of 12 meters from Madong up the coast to the mouth of the Sepik River, traveling along that river to Marienberg and Moame, then along the Karozamari River to the Karawadi River and onto the Arabundio River in Yemes, after which it was necessary to transport their stores and equipment by pinnace, canoe and ultimately on foot to their mountain base on the upper Arabundio River. During their first expedition, the Akmana field party prospected the tributaries of the Arabundio and then trekked across a spur of the central mountain range to sample the upper Karawadi River. Retracing their steps to the Arabundio, they then headed out across another spur of the central mountain range to the junction of the Uat River with the Jimmy and Bayir rivers, again without finding gold in sufficient quantity. Returning to Madong at the end of December 1929, several of the party went back to Sydney to obtain instructions from the Akmana Gold Prospecting Company. In mid-February 1930, the second expedition quickly returned to their mountain base and on across the mountains to the junction of the Uat with the Bayir and Jimmy rivers. They prospected south along the Bayir River to its junction with the Marimuni and Tarawa rivers, where they established a palisaded forward camp naming the place Akmana Junction. From this base they prospected along the Marimuni River and its tributaries, again without success. Finally they prospected the Tarawa River south past the tributary which flows to Waipai, once more without success, and on the advice of mining engineer Seal, it was decided there was nothing to justify further exploration. They had not progressed to any country on the southern watershed through which the early explorers and prospectors traveled to the Hagan Range and Wabog. The party returned to Madong, sailing for Sydney on July 3, 1930. After leading the first expedition, Sam Freeman did not return and Reg Beasley became party leader of the second expedition, with Ponty Seal mining engineer, Bill McGregor and Beasley prospectors and recruiters, and Ernie Shepard in charge of transport and supplies, prospecting when opportunity arose. They had all served overseas during World War I with the AIF on the Western Front, in Egypt and the Levant, and had previously been to New Guinea.